Good morning, Miss Lloyd. Can you see me? Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Mrs. Lloyd? Ms. Lloyd, can you hear me? Let's take a rain check and see if we can get the computer link up working properly.
Yes, sir.
I'll rise for a moment.
Thank you.
Ms. Lloyd, can you now hear me?
I can, thank you.
And you can see me?
I can.
Well, that is an improvement, isn't it? I'm very sorry to have kept you waiting for so long.
Oh, that's good.
There's been one positive outcome, that I've made a mental note to myself to be more forgiving next time I watch the news on TV and they have a breakdown in the link between somebody remote from the studio. But I'm sorry it had to happen to you to make that.
Oh, thank you. Well, it was a little disconcerting, but I thought as long as I haven't cursed the equipment, that's okay.
Well, these things come with social distancing, don't they? But anyway, yes. We're now ready to start. Let me just explain where you are. You can tell us actually where you are at the moment. You're in your office, are you?
I am in my office, yes.
And elsewhere in the office, who's there?
Nobody in my office.
But outside there are your members of staff? Or?
Well, most of them are having an executive team at the moment, so most of them aren't in the corridor.
Right. You're talking to a room which has some 8 members of the inquiry staff, one of whom is Shumik, whose job it is to let you see documents. Another is Mary, who will ask you to take the oath in a moment or two. But the audience you're really talking to are the audience beyond Fleetbank House, which is remote. It'll be about 200 or so people who will be watching. Can I apologise to them too for having kept them waiting, because they would have been cursing the screen. I'm very sorry. I hope it doesn't happen again. We do what we can. Anyway, with that introduction, Mary, would you...
Please state your full name.
And Judith Lloyd.
Take the book in your raised hand. Raise it. And repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Mrs. Lloyd, can you see and hear me?
I can.
Thank you. You were the chair of the Caxton Foundation between February 2013 and March 2015, is that right?
That's true.
And you have provided us with your employment history, which shows that since 1982, you've held increasingly senior roles in the NHS, including between 1992 and 2001 as Chief Executive of a healthcare trust. And between 2001 and 2009, you were the Director General of Health and Social Care and the Chief Executive of NHS Wales. Is that correct?
That is true, but that latter employment was via the civil service rather than the NHS.
Mrs. Lloyd, can you still hear me?
I can.
Oh, good. So something's just popped up on my screen. And you retired you retired in 2009. Is that right? Mrs. Lloyd, can you hear me?
No. We've lost it. I'm sorry. Let's try again. I'll take a break.
Thank you.
Try and get it right.
Mrs. Lloyd, if you can hear me, we're going to take a break.
You better use the text or other communication.
Yes.
I'm very sorry yet again for testing your patience.
Oh, thanks.
Well, let's hope that we don't have to have a third time lucky.
Yes.
Miss Scott.
So, Mrs. Lloyd, we know from your witness statement that you retired in 2009, but since then you've held a number of posts. You've been the Appointments Commissioner for Health and Social Care in London between 2009 and 2012. You've been the Chair of the Welsh Health Specialist Service Committee, and you've been the Chair of the Aneurin Bevan University Health Board. Is that right?
Yes.
I'm not going to ask you today any questions about your role as Director General or Chief Executive of NHS Wales. So some core participants have suggested questions, and those will be the focus of a request for a separate witness statement from you in due course. Today I'm going to be asking you questions about your role as Chair of the Caxton Foundation. In 2013, what experience did you have of being on a charity board and of chairing a board of trustees?
I had been a charity trustee of the Shaw Trust by then for some 6 years. I was also on the board of the Patients Association. I had never been the chair, but in the Patients Association, I acted as the vice chair.
And you carried out your role as chair of the Caxton Foundation until March 2015, when you stood down because of other commitments causing a conflict of interest. How did that arise?
I was asked whether or not I would apply for the Welsh Health Specialist Services Committee, which dealt with specialist services, and I'll define those if you wish, but it's the very rare treatments that are undertaken within the health service. And because I wished to contribute more to Wales, I applied for it in open competition and was given the position by the Minister. As part of the role of the Specialist Services Commission, we have to consider very rare treatments and very rare drugs. And there was much discussion at the time when I was in Caxton latterly that there were new treatments coming on course, and you will have seen that in our minutes. And therefore, I considered that there would be a potential conflict if the Welsh Health Specialist Services Commission were asked to consider new treatments with my role on Caxton, which would not be to the benefit of Caxton and its beneficiaries at the time.
What drew you to the Caxton Foundation and applying to become trustee and chair?
I saw the advertisement and was contacted by the headhunter, Veritas. I was very interested in health-related charities, as you can see from the Patients Association contact. And I was aware of the organisation being established to provide grants to potential beneficiaries caused through the infected NHS blood investigations of the 70s and 80s. That was of interest to me in that it was a grant-giving organisation connected with health and would fit with some of the work that we were doing at the Patients Association in terms of ensuring we could get a wide grip of issues coming through patients' groups to inform our future work there as well.
And what did you know? Sorry.
Sorry.
Please
I was
finish.
in that position. Okay. Sorry to contradict.
What did you know about people becoming infected with hepatitis C via blood and blood products during the 1970s and 1980s when you first came to Caxton?
Well, there are two slightly different questions, I think, are there? What did I know about infected blood in the 70s and 80s? And then what did I know before, as I was coming to Caxton?
No.
Is that a true definition?
No. What did you know about people becoming infected in the 1970s and 80s in 2013 when you came to Caxton?
Fine. Well, obviously, I knew that the Skipton Fund had been specifically established to ensure that there could be a recognition of the challenge of people who had been infected by the NHS through infected blood. Because I was at the Welsh Government when the UK Government announced that being brought into view, and that as a consequence of I think it was the Archer and the Penrose inquiries, that charitable organisations were to be set up in order to provide grants, etc., to people who would be potential beneficiaries. The actual policy making in Wales on this particular issue, in other words, the Skipton Foundation, was undertaken in the CMO's, the Chief Medical Officer's office, and not in my department. But nevertheless, I knew exactly why it was being established and when.
And what kind of information or induction were you given at the time of your appointment to the Caxton Foundation, in particular about the challenges facing the Caxton Foundation as at 2013?
I was given very little induction, except conversations, very helpful conversations, that I had with the Vice Chair, who outlined the rationale behind establishing the charity in the first place, the difficulties that were being faced in trying to ensure that those who could be beneficiaries actually made representation to us for grants, because we were very concerned and remained very concerned about the numbers of people who were coming forward, and that there were concerns about how effective the organisation was to date.
And we'll come on and look at the priorities that you set yourself at the start of your time there a little bit later on. Is this correct, that by the time you arrived at Caxton, a company, the Caxton Trustee Limited, had been established to act as the corporate trustee of the Caxton Foundation? So, in fact, while I've been calling you and your fellow trustees, in fact, you were directors of the company that was the corporate trustee of the Caxton Foundation.
When I applied for this position, I wasn't aware of the technicalities of the legality of Caxton, but Mr. Lister advised me of that. And that's because of the liabilities, the potential liabilities that could be borne by the individual trustees, that they had decided to become a company, and that the board and the organisation would thereby become the corporate trustee.
But did you understand that were your powers and obligations to act in accordance with the trust deed in the same way that they would have been if you were a trustee rather than a director of the corporate trustee?
I considered that would be the case. We still had to undertake the charitable function for which the organisation had been established and would be bound by those rules.
So I'm going to continue during the course of this afternoon to refer to you as trustees, although technically that's not correct, and you're directors. Your statement tells us that you initially had a concern that there may be a conflict of interest in having one chief executive for both the Macfarlane Trust and the Caxton Foundation. What did you consider? How did you consider that conflict may or did arise?
I believe that it was quite difficult as a chief executive for two organisations to actually adjudicate over your time and the priorities that were being followed by the organisations. We did have a sound relationship with McFarlane, but there could be confidential issues that would arise within each trust that would make it very, very difficult on occasions, and these would be rare, I'm sure, for the chief executive. However, my main concern was if one of the organisations believed that it had a greater command over the time of the chief executive, we could get into conflict with each other.
Can we just look at a document on that point? It's CAXT 40110 underscore 094.
Oh, right.
My screen doesn't seem to be working. I don't know if you've got the document up, Mrs. Lloyd. Has anything come up for you?
Is this the partnership group meeting?
Yes, it's a transcript taken from a recording of the partnership meeting.
Thank you.
Have you got that on your screen, Mrs. Lloyd? Because both my screens are now blank.
Yes, thank you.
So do you have that on your screen?
I do, yes. I've lost my picture of the witness, but I do have. She's back, but I do have the screen for the document.
Well, I've got a printed copy.
Just take it. You were going to say something, Mrs. Lloyd.
No, I just questioned what it was we were looking at because I couldn't see it very well at first. It's now clear. Thank you.
So this is a document, it says at the top, the following transcript is taken from the recording of the Caxton Foundation Partnership Group meeting that's been approved by the campaign group members that attended. It's a genuine attempt to reflect accurately the discussions which took place at the meeting, and then it gives the date 28th November 2013. Was this document a document you saw shortly after the meeting took place? Or around that time?
I cannot recall accurately when I received a copy of this document, I'm afraid.
We can see that you, second name down, you were attendee along with Jan Barlow and Charles Lister, the Vice Chair.
Yes.
And it's a discussion about staffing that I want to draw your attention to. So we can see the beginning of that discussion starts at page 5.
Oh, yes.
And then I don't want to look at the first few pages, just to go over to page 8, please. Sorry, in fact, just to go over to page 9, sorry, page 9.
Thank you.
Have you got that up on the screen?
Yeah, I have got page 9.
Okay. So if we look, the first paragraph there, about halfway down, a few lines up from, I've got 2 sort of hole punch marks in mine. Halfway along that line, it says, AL said, let us take back the whole issue of the information that we can use, fully provide through more organisations on hepatitis C on our own website in terms of the sort of scope of what we're doing at the moment, the expectation of our beneficiaries, etc. And this is the bit that I want to draw your attention to. We've been trying very hard to improve communications. We are hugely handicapped by the fact that we actually have lost staff or just haven't got anybody at the moment to do it with the challenges of MFT and its distribution of the reserves, which took everybody's time for the last few months. But it's our aim to be much more clear about what we are able and not able to do, and to help the beneficiaries to attain the benefit from the charitable resource, etc. So, Shamit, you can take that down. Is this the sort of concern that you had about there being one chief executive for 2 organisations? There was a fight over resource, and sometimes the Caxton Foundation may come off worse.
Yes, that was the type of concern about which I expressed my concerns. As it happened with this particular issue, it was additional work required by Caxton that couldn't be undertaken, rather than the general facilitation of grants by the staff. That would always have had to have continued, because that was fair and equal. But it was the additional work that was required, and that sometimes was in conflict with what we might have wished the staff to do as a first priority.
And that additional work you're referring to there was trying hard to improve the communications with the beneficiaries to let them know what they could apply for and so on.
Yes.
And so, what was it that in your witness statement you suggest that you put in place a communications protocol between the two organisations to try and deal with this potential conflict? Was that a success?
In the whole, yes. We did used to discuss what our priorities were, but in this instance, because of the combination of losing staff and the fact that the distribution of reserves in MFT would have taken first priority, because that was in the interests of their part of the organisation's beneficiaries, then we could not proceed as quickly as we wished with the work that we wanted to undertake.
Did you consider that there might be a conflict to the extent that both the Macfarlane Trust and the Caxton Foundation were pursuing the same pot of Department of Health money?
No.
Why not?
Because the requests that we made were quite separate and not shared with each other. The budget within the blood team was unknown to either of us. We didn't know the full extent of that. And of course, it was used for many other things. But I never had any evidence that we were bidding against each other.
And did you consider that there may be a conflict arising from the fact that the Caxton Foundation was providing staffing and services to the Macfarlane Trust pursuant to a service level agreement?
No, because that had to be operated absolutely equally, given the balance of work that had to be undertaken. And that was overseen by the Chief Executive.
But how could the Chief Executive of the Macfarlane Trust effectively challenge the Chief Executive of the Caxton Foundation if they were the same person?
Exactly. But I think that one has to rely on the professionalism of individuals, because if Caxton had believed that to be the case, then she would have been challenged.
And the inquiry heard evidence from Mr. Roger Evans that he was unhappy when he was chair of the Macfarlane Trust about the services that were being provided to the Macfarlane Trust by the Caxton Foundation. Was that anything that was brought to your attention?
No.
You say in your witness statement that you considered pursuing the appointment of separate chief executives from Macfarlane Trust and the Caxton Foundation. Can you just tell us what happened to that idea and why you didn't pursue it?
I believed that ideally it would have been a reasonable way through the potential conflicts of interest. However, in the light of getting two people of sufficient seniority at a price that we could afford, I believed would detract some of the money from the beneficiaries, because it would be from a pot.
And did you think that was something you could raise with the Department of Health with a view to trying to increase the budget, the allocation?
The balance of risk I decided was such that we could run with the arrangements for the next 12 months and evaluate them and take a view prior to going to the Department of Health. I really would, in my own mind, have preferred to have taken any bid for additional funding to the Department of Health on the basis of benefits to our beneficiaries rather than staffing.
We look now at a minute of a board meeting from the 2nd of May 2013, Shomik, it's CAXT 40110_034. And we can see at the top there that minutes dated the 2nd of May, and you are present as chair. And if we go to the bottom of that first page, to Chair's statement, it says AL advised the board that she'd spent her first few months as chair getting to know the organisation and understanding priorities. She advised that she intended the board to be able to hold her to account through the chair's statement. And then if we go over the page, there's a discussion then about strategy. Mrs. Lloyd, can you still hear me?
I can.
Good. And it's little 3. AL briefed the board regarding the meeting with the Health Minister, Anna Soubry, on the 25th of March 2013. At that meeting, Caxton had acknowledged that a number of areas required further work and improvement, but plans were now in place to take this forward, including, and then you set out a number of your priorities: developing a strategy for Caxton, work to identify additional clients, recruitment of a board member with experience of living with HCV, creation of a partnership group with stakeholders, improvement to customer care, and further work to establish how best to support clients and not create a dependency culture. Now, we'll come on to look at all of those in a little bit more detail in a moment, but was it your impression after those first few months that there were areas that could be improved at the Caxton Foundation?
Very much so.
And these were your priorities. I mean, in particular, there we see creation of a partnership group with stakeholders. Was it the case that there was no formal method of communicating with beneficiaries by the time you arrived in February 2013?
Not as a collective.
And you, is this also correct that you set up a partnership group that had its first meeting in June 2013?
Yes.
Just before we leave this page, can I just draw your attention to what's said at little 1 about just get this page, strategy. It's the second paragraph there. Following AL's concern regarding the use of the term beneficiary to describe those people Caxton enlisted to support, the board agreed that in future all references would be to clients. Now, we've heard some evidence from Ms. Barlow about this.
May I just ask, if that's so, why on the previous page? Can we go back to the previous page? No.
Is it below at 3?
It's where we're looking at strategy, where it's at the end of the...
It may be page 2. It may be at the bottom of page 2.
Possibly. Yes, those bullet points. Improvements to customer care. Does that mean client care?
Yes.
Thank you.
We heard some evidence from Miss Barlow about this, that this was a decision that she said wasn't very popular with the beneficiary community and was one that was reversed. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true.
Is there a reason why you are still using the word clients in your witness statement?
I didn't realise I was, I'm sorry.
So that's just an oversight on your part, is it?
Yes, I wasn't aware of that.
So I'm going to, Shamit, you can take that down now. So I'm going to look at some of those priorities that you identified in that meeting in May 2013. And first of all, look at the development of a strategy for Caxton.
Yeah.
why was that a priority for you? Why is it that a charity that has a trust deed should have a strategy? Can you explain that to us?
The development of this strategy commenced before I became the chair. So I cannot apprise you of the rationale behind the original decision. But there was a strategy day developed in March, just after this had been established before I got there. But the board had a strategy day, and I would say, from reading being part of that discussion and reading the notes of that strategy meeting, which you kindly sent me, this isn't a strategy. This is a determination of the objectives within our trust deed of what we would and would not do, what we would and would not prioritise.
So,
which I actually think is far more logical than having a strategy.
So, in fact, I think we've given you a couple of documents only this morning, for which I apologise, setting that out. I think the fullest one is probably in the annual report, which is CAXT 5034_008. So it's the 31st of March 2013 annual report. So you can see that on the first page, and then if you turn to page 7 of that document, under future plans at the bottom of that page 7. Do you have that, Mrs. Lloyd?
I do, thank you.
So it says, following the appointment of a new chair and chief executive and 4 other new board members, the board held a strategy day to begin the process of setting out the priorities and direction for the next 5 years. And it established a vision, mission and values for the organisation for the first time. And the vision is that Caxton wants everyone who has been affected by hepatitis C derived from the NHS to be able to live a positive, fulfilling and independent life. The mission, we will reach all those affected by hepatitis C derived from the NHS and work with them to improve the quality of their lives. And the values, respect, fairness, sound stewardship, confidentiality, caring and responsiveness, empowerment and engaging. And then the board sets out the key strategic principles that will govern its work and be priorities in the coming year: effective identification of clients and effective communication and awareness raising. And that's what you've already told us, the importance of identifying potential clients, as they're called. Effective intervention, using the experience of the first 18 months of operation, examining what further support can be offered with a view to developing new partnerships to enhance the range of services. Understanding the external environment, a greater capacity to understand what impact changes, e.g. in the benefit systems, will have on the clients and how best to respond, and ensuring that the Caxton Foundation is appropriately resourced. Continue to have regular discussions with our funder, the Department of Health, regarding appropriate levels of funding to meet the needs of the clients, and look at staffing needs to ensure we have the right skill set to deliver our work. What impact do you think having this kind of strategic principles and objectives had for the Caxton Foundation?
Well, I believe it allowed us to focus our work and test it out with the partnerships that surrounded us, to ensure that arising from the comments that we were having from the beneficiaries and other partners, that this was the right type of suite of objectives that we should be pursuing. And I think for the board to have a common focus based on that knowledge was important.
And is this right? In your statement, you and you've told us this afternoon that you had the strategy day in March, and then these principles were adopted in May. So is it right to understand that there hadn't been any formal, at least formal consultation with the beneficiary community before this, these principles and objectives were finalised?
That is correct.
So if we just stick with this document then and look at the issue of identifying beneficiaries,
Yeah.
can we look at page 6, please? At the bottom there, Caxton's client community, and it says by the end of March 2013, so this is very early on in your chairmanship, 555 primary beneficiaries and widows have been registered with Caxton following receipt of a stage 1 Skipton payment. This was much lower than the number that had been expected, and it remains a key task for Caxton to identify all those whom it could be helping. It's not known whether the shortfall of numbers results from a lack of awareness of Caxton or reluctance to seek charitable help, or whether it signifies that many fewer people than anticipated are in practice in need of Caxton's support. And then it says estimates have been made of the possible numbers of primary beneficiaries. Factors taken into account when making these estimates based on Skipton stage 1 payments are the rate of mortality, the prevalence of asymptomatic hepatitis C and the success rate of antiviral treatments, all of which have to be estimated. But the best estimates so far suggest that the potential total number of primary beneficiaries might be in the region of 1,600, with potentially 400 dependent families. So is this correct, that when you arrived at the Caxton Foundation, there was a thought that they only had registered with them a quarter of the beneficiaries who may in fact be eligible for support?
Yes.
And what did you understand to be the impact of that on the way that the Caxton Foundation had operated thus far?
Well, I don't think that I put it down to what the Caxton Foundation had or had not done, because I was unsighted on what action they had taken, both to identify what we felt was a shortfall or to take action to improve the situation. However, as we had identified a shortfall, then we one of our first priorities actually was to make sure that we took action to try and ensure that people did know what we were there to do and how to get hold of us.
So I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But did you get any sense that the Caxton Foundation had been cautious about disbursement of its allocation because it was expecting this huge increase in the beneficiary population?
No, that is not the impression I gained.
Shamit, you can take that down. So the as you say, I think you described yourself as being unsighted as to what had been done prior to your arrival to try and improve beneficiary numbers. Does that remain the case? You don't know what was done before you arrived? Is that sorry? Did you say yes?
Yes, sorry. No, sorry. I said
the
no.
answer to the question, she still remains unsighted.
The internet connection is unstable. It's telling me.
Yes.
No, I remain unsighted.
Thank you.
And you've frozen.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Good. Okay.
I can now. Yes, thank you.
And is this right? And I can take you to the document if it assists. But at the first board meeting that you attended as chair in February 2013, that there was a discussion about approaching those who had received Skipton Fund's Stage 1 payments to tell them about the Caxton Foundation, and it was considered that carried significant data protection problems. Do you want me to take you to the document? Would that assist? It's CAXT.
No, it's okay. okay.
No, it's okay.
I
okay.
remember that.
Yes. Is that correct? That there was a discussion
That's
about
okay, honestly.
Yes. So my question is that correct? In February, that first...
was what was reported.
That was what was recorded. Do you recall whether
Yes,
or not...
that was what was reported.
Sorry, right. Do you recall whether or not an approach was actually made to the Skipton in order to ask them whether or not they would approach their beneficiaries, or was the decision made that actually there's no point in even asking?
Well, I can't recall. I wasn't chairman until the end of this meeting, and I can't recall the finite detail of exactly what was discussed. But the importance of this for me was that it alerted me to the fact that there was this problem, and that we had some indication of direction to improve the situation if we did work with Skipton.
So is this right? You don't have any recollection of whether or not direct requests were made of Skipton by the Caxton Foundation?
No.
And do you recall whether the Caxton Foundation sought and obtained any legal advice about the data protection issue?
I do not know.
And I'm going to show you a provision in the trust deed now. It's CAXT 5095_006. You can see it's page 15 of that document. And it's the Schedule 5, which deals with the background to the establishment of the Caxton Foundation. And it's clause 7 of that at the bottom. Under the Skipton Fund agreement and at the request of the trustees, the Skipton Fund is, subject to compliance with data protection laws, required to notify the trustees of the identity of the primary beneficiaries. Do you remember whether that was something that the trustees were aware of when these considerations and discussions were taking place, that there was that obligation on the Skipton Fund?
Well, you kindly sent me this document this morning, for which I'm grateful. And I have never seen this document before. But certainly, I do not believe that the Caxton Foundation trustees really appreciated this, which, the chairman, the outgoing chairman, was part of this agreement. So whether or not a codicil to this had been produced prior to the 7th of February 13, I don't know. Because, as I said, I've never seen this document before.
So, Chairman, you can take that down. Just to understand then, you were never given, when you joined the Caxton Foundation as chair or at any other time, a copy of the trust deed?
No.
Can you recall? We know from your statement that in September 2014, a look back exercise was undertaken by Skipton to identify beneficiaries for the Caxton Foundation. I'll come on and ask you questions about that in a moment. But can you recall what steps, if any, other steps were taken by the Caxton Foundation to advertise its existence to potential beneficiaries?
Yes, we had extensive talks with the Haemophilia Society and the Hepatitis Society to ask them to publicise our work, and they were very accommodating in that respect. And we continued discussions with Skipton about what was possible from their point of view. and I know you're coming to that.
So, am I to understand that you do recall discussions with Skipton about what they could and couldn't do in terms of getting in touch with their beneficiary population?
Yes, the chief executive had those discussions on our behalf.
And Skipton was saying to you, no, we can't do it.
They couldn't do it because of staffing.
Not they weren't raising data protection issues. They were raising staffing issues.
At that time, they weren't raising data protection issues.
So, just trying to understand this, the Caxton Foundation were concerned there were data protection issues, but in fact, when they went to Skipton was saying, no, that's not the issue. The issue is staffing.
Yes.
And how then did that resolve itself and end up in a look-back exercise being carried out in August and September of 2014?
We made an application to the Department of Health to fund Skipton to undertake this work on our behalf.
And the Caxton Foundation made that application, did they?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was the result of that? Can you recall?
Yes, the Department of Health gave the money requested to the Skipton Foundation to conduct the look back on our behalf, and that is why, and to make contact with their clients, really, so that we again did not hold the records of those individuals, but Skipton acted on our behalf, and as a consequence, the numbers of potential beneficiaries increased rapidly.
And looking back now, do you think that more could have been done by the Caxton Foundation to get this work done before it was in August, September 2014?
I think we probably could have pushed harder, but then I'm always a bit impatient to get things done.
Another element of the strategy that we looked at in the annual report was the appointment of a user trustee with experience of hepatitis. When did you become aware that it was important for at least some members of the beneficiary community to have a user trustee on the board?
Pretty early on, there had, I understand from Mr. Lister, been some discussions about this latterly before I came on board, and having been a trustee of the Patients Association, I did find it unusual for a grant-making organisation that was focused on beneficiaries not to have anybody on the board who at least had the lived experience of the condition. So I believed it was as part of our trying to get a better, more comprehensive relationship with the partners with whom we were working and the beneficiaries, it would be a good addition to our board.
And did you understand there to be a concern about the ability of the board to challenge the Department of Health effectively because there were members of the board who had had senior roles at the Department of Health or in the NHS?
No.
You didn't. You weren't aware of that.
I never even considered it. It certainly did not. It didn't alter any behaviour.
But did you become aware that there was a concern amongst some in the beneficiary community that was the case?
Yes, I did become aware of that, but could, by our actions, reassure them that that was not the case.
So did you consider that recruiting a user trustee would address those concerns, or was that not part of the consideration?
No, it wasn't part of that consideration. It was more that we wanted to have a greater understanding of the condition and its consequences.
And is this right that while user trustees, while beneficiaries, should I put it that way, while beneficiaries of Caxton were not excluded from applying to become the user trustee, the board felt that it would be preferable not to have a beneficiary because of potential conflicts of interest.
That is true.
And what were the board's concerns? What were the board's concerns about conflict of interest?
I think that if we're discussing the details of either applications or the rates at which we were paying grants, or the comprehensive nature of the grants, then it could be an issue of a conflict of interest if a user who is a beneficiary was also party to that. They might have to exclude themselves. You've got to be quite careful about declarations of interest. And we thought it would probably be preferable if the individual was not a beneficiary, but as you have pointed out, we didn't rule that out.
And were you aware at the time of the Charity Commission's guidance on user trustees, users on boards and beneficiaries who become trustees?
No.
And would you accept that at the time that this was under consideration, the Caxton Fund had already put in place some measures to deal with perceived conflicts of interest from other trustees? So, for example, Mr. Lister tells us in his witness statement that he recused himself from having direct meetings with the Department of Health because of his previous role in the Department of Health.
Yeah.
Could that approach not have been taken for a beneficiary user trustee?
Well, as I said, we did not rule out definitively that a user trustee, a beneficiary, could not become a trustee, but we were concerned about the conflicts of interest, which is what we tested.
And you appointed Mrs. Margaret Kennedy as she was termed a user trustee, but in fact she wasn't a user trustee, was she? She wasn't a registrant of the Caxton Foundation, but she had been infected with hepatitis C through contaminated blood. Is that right?
That's right.
And so she was there to fulfil the role on the board, if I can put it that way, of somebody with lived experience of hepatitis C.
Yes.
Was any consideration given by the board to appointing another trustee from the beneficiary community?
Not at that time. We were going to evaluate the consequences of having a trustee with lived experience on the sort of quality of our decision making in 2015 before considering further appointments.
And then you left the Caxton Foundation before that could take place.
Yeah. Might I just add something?
Yes.
Please. What we also had in mind is that we had a number of really good applicants, some of whom were beneficiaries, and that as a consequence, we wanted to invite them to the partnership group, but also I thought it would be a good idea to increase the participation of the beneficiaries by trying to establish regional fora in which we could gather more extensively the views and wishes of our beneficiaries. But that again didn't commence, well, I don't think it ever commenced, but if I'd have stayed, it would have. I was very keen that we should use the people who had applied, who were very, very good and met the criteria more extensively, and they seemed keen to do that.
And I'll come on to ask you a few more questions about that in a little bit later on. When you, the APPG in its report made a recommendation that in order to improve relationships with the beneficiary community, a portion of trustees should be recruited from the beneficiary population and that the Haemophilia Society should appoint 3 trustees to the Caxton Foundation, as they do for the Macfarlane Trust. Can you recall whether or not you had a response to that a recommendation as a board? It was shortly before you left the Caxton Foundation.
Well, because it was shortly before, I did not discuss that, but I understand that the board did consider the whole of the parliamentary inquiry's recommendations subsequently.
And you personally, do you think that that kind of recruitment from the beneficiary population, do you think that could have improved relationships with the beneficiary community?
I'm not sure.
Why?
Well, I'm just not sure. I did not have the opportunity to evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of that recommendation. And had I stayed, I would have discussed with the chair of MFT what the advantages and disadvantages might be. And I left before I had the opportunity to have that conversation.
So I'm conscious of the time. I don't know what you want to do about breaks and so on, given the late start that we've had. I anticipate that I've probably got 45 minutes to an hour left with Mrs. Lloyd.
Yes. Well, shall we just go on for another quarter of an hour, if you can?
Yes.
And take a break then, because I'm sure both Ms. Lloyd and those at home could do with a break at that stage. Then we'll come back and see how we go. I'm sorry, it's going to be a rather longer afternoon than we'd anticipated for the reasons which are all too obvious from the way we started.
So, Mrs. Lloyd, you were telling us about the changes that you wanted to make to the partnership group as a result of interviewing and meeting with the beneficiaries who had applied to become the user trustee. Is this right, that you did in fact make some changes to the partnership group in about November 2014?
Yes.
And what were those changes, and why did you make them?
Well, we made them to increase the range and spread of the advice and guidance we could be given from the beneficiary and partnership communities, and they were invited to attend. But that's not as far as we wanted to go. We undertook, I don't know whether you're going to come to this, the survey that we undertook, or is that a separate question?
No, do talk about that now.
Shall I carry on?
Yes, please do.
We undertook a survey with our beneficiaries to ask them how they would like us to engage with them more effectively. We were thinking of regional meetings at that time, but there was little uptake for that. They weren't very keen on that, which was a surprise, but you've got to respect people's views. And we were reviewing the outcome of that survey, to ensure that we could put into practice the suggestions that they have largely made.
And did you consider, as a matter of general principle, that having a partnership group was an effective way of communicating with the beneficiary population community?
It was a way of communicating, and when I looked through the information that you sent me last Thursday and the partnership group meetings, it was clear to me that a number of things that they raised, particularly at the first 2 meetings, were really important to us, and we were able to action their concerns and put them right, or at least make sure that they were discussed either by the board or the National Welfare Committee to alleviate concerns that were being expressed by the community. So in looking at and evaluating what was said and what was done, I felt that we were getting a better view of what the the beneficiaries believed would be an improvement than we would have without that partnership group.
And why was it that it took until December 2014 to produce a newsletter?
I don't know. There were instructions that it should be done long before that.
So that was something that you were disappointed with, was it?
Yeah.
And was there consideration given to whether a forum should be created on the website to allow beneficiaries to communicate either with each other or with members of the staff or trustees?
That came up latterly, I understand, because I wasn't unfortunately at the last of the partnership meetings before I left, and that would have been a sensible way forward as well. It's not an unusual technique.
So not something you were averse to, but just something that didn't happen during your time there.
No.
And I think you've said that you were keen on regional meetings, but they didn't in fact take place during your time at the Caxton. Is that right?
There was no enthusiasm for them from the returnees of our survey.
And equally, did the Caxton have any sort of larger conferences and so on? We've heard evidence from the McFarlane Trust and the Eileen Trust that they ran fairly regular events open either to all of the beneficiaries or certain categories of beneficiary. Yeah. Did the Caxton Foundation have any events of that nature?
Yes, we had one whilst I was there, which we initiated.
And what did that entail?
There were some seminars and there was a general discussion on things that the beneficiaries wished to raise.
And was it well attended?
Yes, quite well attended, although not as well as attended as I expected.
And did you find it a useful forum for meeting beneficiaries and discussing the issues that they were concerned with?
Yes.
And was that a forum in which you got to meet beneficiaries that you hadn't got to meet through the partnership group?
Yes.
And were there plans for further such events?
Yes.
And did those not happen in your time because you'd left by then?
Yes.
Can you recall when that event was?
Gosh, I can't, I'm afraid. I'm awfully sorry. I can't remember when it was.
I'm going to ask you some questions now about an event that took place on the 17th of April 2013 when a group of beneficiaries came into the offices at the Alliance House organisation. Is it right that you weren't present at the Alliance House offices on that day?
That's true. And the beneficiaries knew that would be the case.
The inquiry has heard evidence from Ms. Barlow that she was present in the office having a meeting but didn't witness the events themselves. Is that also your understanding?
No.
Did you come to hear about the event from Ms. Barlow?
Yes.
And you understood, did you, that she'd actually seen what had gone on?
Yes.
And was she the sole source of your information about the events
no.
Initially?
No.
Who else?
Well,
initially?
Yes. Right, yeah.
I'm just going to take you to a letter that you wrote on the 2nd, I've written the 2nd of April, I think it's the 26th of April. It's WITN 205 0107. This is the 26th, so if we go to the second page of that document, it's the 26th of April 2013. It's a letter to Mr. Wilkinson, and it says at paragraph 2, I'm most disturbed to hear that despite being informed that we were not available, you and a number of your colleagues took it upon yourselves to barge unannounced and uninvited into the office on the 17th of April, causing real concern to the staff. Such behaviour is not acceptable, and I was particularly concerned to learn that one of your number has publicised the fact that your group thought the effect of your visit on our staff was amusing. And then I understand the frustrations of potential beneficiaries, and we do wish to work constructively with you and other representatives from the HCV community to deliver our services well. But I have to advise you that neither I nor my board will tolerate such behaviour in the future. You can take that down now, Shomik. Does that account that you've set out there, does that reflect what you were told by Miss Barlow had occurred?
Yes, and it was corroborated by our external auditor.
And who was the what was the external auditor present in the office?
Yes.
And the external auditor spoke to you, did he or she?
Spoke to, corroborated Jan Barlow's understanding of what had happened.
And you spoke to the auditor, did you?
I spoke to the auditor.
And they told you what had happened was in similar terms to what's set out in this letter.
Yes.
The inquiry's seen a leaflet that was published by the Caxton Foundation that invited beneficiaries to pop in to attend the office if they wished to. Is that a leaflet that you were familiar with at the time?
No.
Have you seen it subsequently?
No.
And so presumably you weren't aware of the existence of that leaflet when you wrote this letter?
No.
Did you take any steps before writing this letter to find out what Mr. Wilkinson's account of the incident was?
No.
Do you think, with the benefit of hindsight, that it would have been a good idea to do so?
Yes, and I've already apologised to Mr. Wilkinson.
And when you spoke to him about this event, did his version of the event differ to the version that you'd been given by Ms. Barlow and the auditor?
Yes. He said he popped in to say hello.
Can we look then now at another document? It's CAXT 40110_034. This is the document we've already looked at. Yes, it's the minutes of the 2nd of May 2013 board meeting. If we turn to page 3 of those minutes, under 5 at the top there, the little 5, the board noted a report from JB regarding the intrusion into Caxton's offices by members of the Contaminated Blood campaign on the 17th of April. It was noted that AL had written to the chair of the CBC and Roger Evans had also written to the McFarlane Trust beneficiary who'd been involved. It was noted that following the visit, increased security measures had been put in place. It also noted that the Department of Health had been briefed. Just pausing there, why was the Department of Health briefed? Can you recall?
I cannot recall why they were briefed.
And then going back to the note, excuse me, JB advised that while it had been an unpleasant experience for staff, their main concern had been to ensure no confidential client information could be accessed by CBC members whilst they were in the offices. Board thanked the staff for their calm handling of the situation. Is it right to understand that these, show me, you can take that down, that these minutes were published on the website?
Yes, all minutes are published on the website.
Did you consider the impact that publishing minutes in those forms, with that in that form, with that description of the incident, might have on beneficiary communications, beneficiary relations? Sorry.
No, not explicitly.
Is this right that at a partnership group meeting subsequently a request was made for those minutes to be removed from the website because of the impression that they gave? Yes. And were any steps taken to either tone down the language or put that part of the minute into the confidential section of the minutes that weren't published on the website, or any steps taken at all to deal with those concerns?
Oh gosh, I can't actually remember, but I believe that action was taken. We had a long conversation at the partnership group about this at the end.
And so you think action was taken to
I think so.
And that was,
I'm not precise about it. I'm really sorry.
and that presumably was for the sake of good beneficiary relations, was it?
Yeah. Yes. And because I'd already apologised to Mr. Wilkinson for not consulting him prior to writing the letter.
So I'm going to go on to another topic. I hope I'll only be about 30 to 40 minutes.
Right. Well, let's take a break now then. Now, you will no doubt be fielding some questions which core participants may have during the break. So shall we say, was 4:10 too early for you?
No, I think that will be fine. And then if we need another short break, then we could have another short break perhaps after Mrs. Lloyd has completed her evidence.
Yes, well, I'm concerned not to keep Mrs. Lloyd here any longer
Quite.
than is necessary, but yes, let's do that then.
I'm happy to stay, Chair.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That's very kind of you. Thank you. 4:10 in any event, and there'll probably be another break before we finish. So 4:10.
Thank you.
Thank you.